Beastwoman with jungle tattoos pinned me against a tree mid-mission, just to sniff my neck. Welcome to the world of science fiction. Comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Jack Mercer's boots sank into the damp, spongy soil as he moved cautiously through the dense alien jungle. The air was thick, heavy with humidity, and the oppressive heat made his armor stick to his skin, despite the high-tech cooling systems built into it. The trees above him towered, their massive roots like serpents, twisted and coiled in every direction. The foliage was dense, the mist swirling like fog, making it difficult to see more than a few meters ahead. This wasn't the kind of mission Jack was used to. As a recon officer for the Interstellar Peacekeeping Force, he was typically tasked with gathering intelligence on enemy movements or coordinating diplomacy between factions. But this mission, well, this was different. This planet was hostile, its atmosphere thick with danger, and his team had been dispatched to conduct reconnaissance in an area long considered impassable. Jack glanced to his left, catching a glimpse of the woman who had been assigned as his partner on this mission, Naira, a warrior of the planet's native jungle tribes. She was unlike anyone he had ever worked with before, a skilled and deadly fighter with a reputation for fearlessness. Her green fur blended seamlessly with the jungle around her, and her tribal tattoos glowed faintly in the dim light of the jungle, shifting with the movement of her muscles. The patterns on her skin, ancient and sacred, told the story of her people's history and the strength that flowed through her. At first glance, Naira had been intimidating. But Jack had come to respect her, her silent intensity and her precise movements. He had seen her take down a heavily armed enemy scout with nothing but a spear and her speed. She was capable, focused, and someone he needed to stay close to if they were going to survive this mission. The thick fog curled around them, carrying the calls of unknown predators in the distance, but Naira didn't flinch. She moved with a grace that Jack could never match, her eyes scanning every tree, every shadow as if she knew exactly where danger would come from next. "Keep your guard up," Naira's voice cut through the stillness, low and sharp. "This jungle has a way of hiding threats." Jack nodded, though he wasn't entirely comfortable with the situation. Recon wasn't supposed to be about combat, not like this. They had a mission, a clear objective, and yet here he was, wandering through an alien jungle with a woman he barely knew, following her lead, and hoping the night didn't bring an attack from one of the many predators lurking in the mist. "We should be close," Jack said, trying to focus on their objective. They had been tasked with gathering intel on a rogue faction that had been using this jungle as their base of operations. The higher-ups thought they were hidden, but Jack knew that with Naira's help, they would locate them quickly. Naira didn't answer immediately. Her focus was unbroken as she moved ahead of him, her ears twitching, picking up sounds that Jack couldn't. When she stopped abruptly, Jack almost walked into her. She turned to him, her blue eyes meeting his. "Something's off. Do you smell that?" Jack frowned, confused. He didn't smell anything out of the ordinary, just the thick, earthy scent of the jungle. "What do you mean?" he asked, a little irritated. He had been trained to rely on his senses in the field, but this was different. He wasn't used to working with someone who relied on something he couldn't even begin to understand. Naira inhaled deeply, her nostrils flaring. "There's a strange scent in the air. Not natural." "Something different," she muttered, her expression changing from focused to intense. Before Jack could ask what she meant, Naira stepped closer to him, her face only inches from his. Jack froze, his breath catching in his throat as she took another deep breath, her nose brushing against his neck. Her sharp eyes locked onto him, and the moment stretched between them. Her presence was overwhelming, and for the first time since they'd met, Jack felt out of his depth. She inhaled deeply again, her blue eyes narrowing. "You smell like, mate." The words hit him like a jolt of electricity. His heart raced, his mind scrambling to make sense of the situation. Naira's presence was unsettling, and now, her words were enough to throw him off balance completely. He had assumed that the tribes of this world were focused on survival, strength, and war, not on relationships. He had heard the rumors of their customs, of their fierce bonds and mating rituals, but to hear her speak so casually about him. "Mate?" Jack repeated, his voice thick with disbelief. He took a step back, unsure of how to react. Was she joking? Was this some form of psychological warfare? He had to be missing something. Naira's expression remained unreadable, though her eyes flickered with something Jack couldn't place. She didn't back away, instead stepping closer, her gaze never leaving his. You smell like it. I'm not wrong. You're not the first to smell that way around me. She said the words matter-of-factly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Jack swallowed hard, trying to make sense of her words. The heat in the jungle seemed to intensify, or maybe it was just the proximity of Naira, her intensity overwhelming. Look, I'm here for the mission. I'm here to get the job done, nothing else. He wasn't sure why he felt the need to explain himself, but something about this situation had caught him off guard. Naira didn't seem bothered by his words. If anything, she seemed to understand. She stepped back, giving him space, but the air between them still buzzed with a strange tension. This jungle is full of mysteries, she said quietly, almost to herself, her gaze distant as if she were lost in thought. The beasts here don't just hunt with their claws. They sense things too. Things we can't always explain. Jack stared at her for a moment, then nodded, unsure of what to say. The jungle was a dangerous place, and he didn't need to be distracted by this new, unsettling information. We need to keep moving, he said, turning away from her and adjusting his pack. Naira didn't say anything more about the incident. She simply led the way again, her focus sharp and unwavering, as if nothing had happened. But Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. There was a strange tension in the air now, something far deeper than he had realized. Whatever it was, he knew it was only the beginning of something far more complicated than he had signed up for. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Jack's thoughts lingered on Naira's words. He couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that this mission was becoming far more personal than he had ever imagined. The air in the jungle grew heavier as they pressed on. Jack tried to shake off the strange encounter with Naira, though the tension between them lingered in the back of his mind. Her words kept repeating in his head, that strange comment about smelling like mate. He wasn't sure what to make of it. In his world, such things were either joked about or treated as absurd. But here, on this alien planet, where survival was the only rule, everything was different. The customs were unfamiliar, and despite his best efforts, Jack knew he was only beginning to scratch the surface. They continued through the dense underbrush, the humid air sticking to their clothes as they carefully navigated their way deeper into enemy territory. The rogue faction they had come to investigate was well known for their ability to hide in the jungle's vast expanse. The mission wasn't just about reconnaissance anymore, it had become a dangerous game of survival. Jack had learned that much in the first few hours of the operation. Naira, however, seemed unaffected. She moved like a shadow, a predator in her own right. Her glowing tribal tattoos, always visible under the dim canopy, reminded Jack of the deep connection she had with this place. The jungle, its sounds, its smells, were part of her. She was at home here, more than any human could ever be. Jack couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he watched her lead the way, her eyes scanning every inch of their surroundings with that sharp, otherworldly focus. It wasn't just her senses that amazed him, it was her presence. There was an intensity in everything she did. She didn't speak much, but when she did, it was with purpose. Every move she made was calculated, every step deliberate. In many ways, Jack felt out of his depth, struggling to catch up to her rhythm. The jungle was a deadly place, but Naira had lived in it all her life. She had honed the skills needed to survive, to thrive here. And now, by some twist of fate, he was learning to adapt, too. They finally came to a clearing, the trees parting to reveal a dilapidated outpost on the far side. The rogue faction's base. Jack's pulse quickened as he surveyed the area, mentally running through their plan once again. They had to get close enough to gather intel, find out what the faction was planning, and make sure they didn't alert them to their presence. A simple task, but far from easy. Naira crouched low, her glowing tattoos dimming as she blended with the shadows. Jack followed her lead, doing his best to mimic her movements. He had spent years in recon, but this was different. This wasn't about sneaking through enemy lines, this was about surviving a jungle full of predators, both human and alien. They approached the outpost carefully, their footsteps silent on the thick jungle floor. Jack's thoughts drifted back to the strange interaction earlier. The scent she had mentioned, the words she had said. He hadn't expected any of it, but now, the more he thought about it, the less he was sure how to interpret her actions. Naira wasn't the kind of person to make a joke, not in the middle of a mission. Was it a cultural thing? Or had he missed something more personal? Before he could ponder it any longer, Naira stopped abruptly, her body rigid. Jack froze, heart hammering in his chest, every sense on high alert. "What is it?" he whispered, his voice barely audible over the rustling of the jungle. Naira didn't answer immediately. Instead, she motioned for him to stay quiet, pointing toward the outpost. Jack squinted, trying to see what she had spotted. In the distance, hidden among the trees, he noticed a group of armed figures, members of the rogue faction, patrolling the perimeter of their base. He cursed under his breath. They hadn't expected guards this close to the jungle's edge. Naira seemed to sense his frustration and turned toward him, her blue eyes meeting his with a calmness that steadied him. She didn't speak, but there was a confidence in her gaze. She would lead them through this, as she had led him through every obstacle so far. They waited, watching the guards move in a slow, deliberate pattern. Naira's instincts were sharp, and Jack knew it. They had to move quickly and quietly to avoid detection. With a single motion, Naira stood and signaled for him to follow. Without a word, they slipped through the shadows, their steps timed perfectly. The next few minutes felt like hours. Every sound seemed amplified in the stillness of the jungle, the crack of a twig, the swish of branches as they moved. Jack kept his breath steady, trying to stay focused. He could hear his heartbeat in his ears, but Naira's presence was a constant reassurance. She was the anchor in this chaotic environment. They reached the perimeter of the outpost undetected, and Jack carefully examined the structure. There was no obvious entrance, but there were small gaps between the thick walls that might provide an opportunity to slip inside. Naira pointed to one of these gaps, then motioned for Jack to follow her. Without hesitation, Jack followed her lead, his hand resting on the hilt of his weapon. They moved silently, sliding between the cracks in the walls and into the heart of the outpost. Once inside, the air was cooler, and the sounds of the jungle faded. Jack's mind raced. They were in, now it was about finding the intel they needed. The space was dimly lit, with only a few torches flickering in the corners. Jack scanned the area, noting the equipment scattered across the floor. This wasn't a military base. It looked more like a hideout, makeshift, haphazard, but dangerous nonetheless. He was about to step forward when Naira stopped him, her hand on his arm. She looked at him, her blue eyes narrowing as if sensing something he couldn't. "Stay close," she whispered. "Something's off." Before Jack could ask her what she meant, a voice echoed through the base, low and guttural. They had been spotted. Jack's heart skipped a beat, but Naira was already moving, her instincts kicking in. She grabbed his arm and pulled him into the shadows, just as footsteps approached from the other side of the room. They were surrounded. Jack's pulse raced, but he trusted Naira. He knew she would get them out of this. He just had to stay focused and wait for the right moment. The tension in the air was thick, and every muscle in Jack's body was coiled tight, ready to spring into action. He followed Naira's lead as they crouched low in the shadows, trying to blend into the corners of the small, dimly lit room. The sound of footsteps grew louder as the guards moved closer, unaware of their presence. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he kept his breath steady. This wasn't the first time he had been in a tight spot like this, but something about the jungle, about Naira's presence, made everything feel more real, more immediate. Naira, as always, moved with calculated precision. Her eyes scanned the room quickly, taking in every detail, every possible escape route. Jack had learned by now that there was no one more capable in a situation like this than her. She had instincts Jack didn't understand, but they were impossible to ignore. The way she read the jungle, the way she moved through the world, it was all second nature to her. The footsteps grew louder, and Jack's hand instinctively went to the hilt of his weapon. His training kicked in, but he forced himself to stay calm. There was no use drawing attention to himself now. The mission had shifted from gathering intelligence to escaping unscathed, and the priority now was survival. "Hold your position," Naira whispered, her voice barely audible, but with a tone that brooked no argument. She was in control, and Jack trusted her instincts. The guards passed by the gap where they were hiding, their footsteps echoing off the stone walls. Jack could see the outlines of their figures through the slivers of light between the walls and the floor, and he counted them silently, 3, maybe 4. They weren't heavily armed, but their presence was enough to pose a significant risk. Jack and Naira had to stay hidden for just a little longer. As the last guard passed, Naira motioned for Jack to move. He followed her silently as she led them toward a darkened hallway that led deeper into the outpost. Jack's eyes adjusted to the dim light as they crept along the walls, careful to avoid the creaky floorboards and the softest of sounds that might give them away. When they reached a narrow door at the end of the hallway, Naira stopped and pressed her ear against it. After a few tense moments, she nodded once, signaling for Jack to follow her. She pushed the door open slowly, and they slipped into the room without a sound. Inside, Jack could see stacks of crates, maps strewn about on the floor, and a few worn-out chairs. It wasn't much, but it was clear they had found what they were looking for. Naira moved quickly, her eyes scanning the contents of the room with a practiced efficiency. She found a small terminal against the far wall, its screen blinking dimly. Jack approached her cautiously, taking in the surrounding area. He didn't like the idea of staying in one place for too long, but he trusted Naira to lead them through. She was already typing on the terminal, her movements swift and deliberate. "We need the data from their last transmission," she said under her breath, her focus unwavering. "If we're going to get out of here, we need to know what they're planning next." Jack nodded and kept watch, scanning the room for any signs of movement. The mission had taken an unexpected turn, but now they had to finish what they'd started. They couldn't afford to fail. The screen blinked again, and Naira pulled up the transmission files. Jack leaned over her shoulder, studying the data as it loaded. It was mostly encrypted, but there were a few sections that were partially readable. Most of it appeared to be military communications, reports on weapon supplies, troop movements, and defensive strategies, but there was one entry that caught Jack's attention. It was a list of names. His mind raced as he recognized some of them. They were allies of the rogue faction, mercenaries who had been hired by another, larger organization. Jack had dealt with these people before. The stakes had just been raised. "They've made contact with someone outside the sector," Jack muttered. "This isn't just about a small rebellion. They're preparing for something big." Naira didn't look up from the screen. "We need to stop them before they mobilize. If they can get their forces to the border, there's no telling how many more will join them." Jack was about to respond when he heard something, a faint sound from the hallway. He glanced over his shoulder, but Naira's reaction was swift. She shut the terminal down and motioned for him to stay silent. Without a word, she moved toward the door, her movements fluid and quiet. Jack followed her lead, staying close and watching for any sign of danger. They positioned themselves near the door, and Jack's heart rate quickened as he listened to the sound of footsteps approaching once again. They were getting closer. Jack's mind raced as he tried to think of a way out. They couldn't risk getting caught, not now that they had the information they needed. They had to escape quickly. Naira looked at Jack, her expression calm but intense. "On my signal," she whispered. "When I move, you move." Jack nodded, trying to steady his breathing. He didn't have to ask what she meant. They would fight their way out if necessary. But Jack trusted her. She had fought beside him, led him through every challenge, and he knew she wouldn't let him down. The footsteps were almost upon them when Naira moved, her body a blur as she swung the door open and darted into the hallway. Jack followed close behind, adrenaline surging through him as he kept pace with her. They moved fast, using the shadows to stay out of sight. The guards were just around the corner, but Naira was ahead of them, her instincts guiding her every step. Jack stayed low, trusting her to lead the way. As they rounded a corner, Naira took down a guard with a swift, silent strike, knocking him unconscious before he could make a sound. Jack moved quickly, checking to make sure they weren't spotted. Another guard appeared ahead, but Naira was already on him, disarming him with ease. They were almost through the base when the alarm suddenly blared, red lights flashing in the hallways. It wasn't over yet. The rogue faction had realized they were compromised. "Move!" Naira hissed, pulling Jack toward the exit. Jack didn't need to be told twice. He followed her out into the jungle, the sounds of pursuit echoing behind them. They sprinted through the thick foliage, the noise of their pursuers fading into the background as they dove into the underbrush. The rain began to fall heavily, blurring their path as they pushed through the dense jungle. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but there was no time to slow down. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Naira led them to a small clearing, her breathing steady despite the exertion. Jack stood beside her, his mind still racing, but his body was beginning to relax. "We've made it," Naira said quietly, her eyes scanning the jungle one last time. "We have what we came for. Now, we just need to make sure we get out of here alive." Jack nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "We will. Together." For the first time in what felt like forever, Jack felt a sense of calm. They had survived. And they would continue to fight, side by side, through whatever came next. The rain came down harder as they sprinted through the dense jungle, the sound of their boots squelching in the mud blending with the cacophony of alien predators and the thrumming of the distant storm. Jack kept his focus on Naira, watching as she expertly navigated the shifting terrain, her movements fluid, her glowing tattoos flickering with every step. He struggled to keep pace, but she had trained in this jungle her entire life. Every instinct she had was honed by the land, by its dangers, and Jack felt as though he was barely keeping up. The adrenaline from their escape still coursed through his veins, but Jack couldn't afford to slow down. Not yet. They had barely made it out of the rogue faction's base, but now they were in the jungle, open ground, exposed. They still had to make it back to their extraction point, and every second counted. "Stay low." Naira barked over her shoulder, her voice commanding, but not without a trace of concern. Jack dropped instinctively, following her lead as they ducked into the thick underbrush, the sound of their heavy breaths mingling with the storm. His mind raced with thoughts of the mission. They had the intel, but at what cost? The data they'd secured from the rogue faction's base was invaluable. It would give the High Command the information they needed to neutralize a major threat, but the mission wasn't over. The danger was still real. They were far from safety. "Do you think they'll catch up?" Jack asked, his voice low but steady as they continued to move deeper into the jungle. Naira's blue eyes flicked toward him, her gaze unreadable. "They'll try. They're not used to being caught off guard." She paused, her ears twitching. "But we've got a head start. They won't catch us if we keep moving." Jack felt the weight of her words, the trust she had in herself and in him. She was confident, and that confidence kept him moving, even when his muscles screamed for rest. "We've lost them for now," Naira added, slowing her pace ever so slightly, but not enough to give Jack time to relax. "But they'll regroup. We need to find a safer route." They moved in silence for a while, the storm's roar and the steady patter of rain against the leaves filling the space between them. Jack's thoughts drifted back to their time inside the outpost. The way Naira had moved with such assurance, the way she had practically read the base, knowing exactly where to find what they needed. She was a force in her own right, and Jack had come to realize that the more he saw of her, the more fascinated he became by her. At first, he had simply thought of her as a partner, a capable, professional soldier who was as deadly as she was skilled. But now, after everything they'd been through, Jack knew there was more to her than that. There was a depth to her, something that wasn't just about survival. She was someone who had lived through hardships, someone who had fought for everything she had. And despite her outward strength, Jack could see the weariness in her eyes, the quiet burden of leadership. It made him wonder about the culture she came from, about the traditions and the burden she carried. He couldn't imagine what it would be like to have your life defined by survival and constant conflict. To always be on the defensive. Yet, despite everything, Naira remained focused. She never let anything distract her, not even the chaos of the jungle. "I've got a question," Jack said, breaking the silence, his voice more thoughtful than before. "Earlier, when you said I smelled like mate, what did you mean by that?" Naira didn't falter in her step, but Jack noticed her shoulders stiffen. She had made no further mention of it since their escape, and Jack had respected her silence, but the question had been nagging at him. "It's a scent," Naira said after a moment, her voice quiet but not defensive. "A signal. Our kind, we have a connection with the jungle. It's more than just the land, it's in the air, in the way we sense things. Our instincts are tied to the environment. When I said you smelled like mate, I meant it in the sense that your scent is compatible with mine." Jack slowed his pace slightly, trying to process her words. "Compatible," he repeated, unsure of what she meant. "Like we're connected?" Naira stopped then, turning toward him with a serious expression. Her blue eyes locked with his. "It's not like how you're used to. This isn't a human connection. It's more instinctive, primal. When two beings are meant to bond, the scent becomes stronger, more noticeable." She hesitated, the weight of the jungle's atmosphere seemingly pressing in on them both. "I don't think it's something you should ignore." Jack felt the chill of the rain against his skin, but something else had settled over him, a different kind of tension. He didn't fully understand what Naira was saying, but he could feel the seriousness in her words. She wasn't joking. She wasn't testing him. "You think I'm meant to bond with you?" Jack asked, his voice low, the question heavy between them. He wasn't sure if he was asking out of curiosity, confusion, or something deeper. Naira's gaze softened, and she took a step closer, the jungle around them becoming even more silent, as if holding its breath. "It's not that simple," she said, her voice a little softer now. "It's not about what you think or what you want. It's about what's been chosen. The jungle has its own way of binding people. I've sensed it for a while now, but it's not something we can rush. It's not something either of us can control." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Jack's mind raced with the possibilities. What did this mean for them? For their partnership? They had come here for a mission, to survive, to gather intel and get back to their extraction point. But now, with everything that had happened, he couldn't ignore the pull between them. There was something undeniably real there, something more than just a partnership built on survival. He wasn't sure how to respond. Part of him wanted to deny it, wanted to reject the idea that something deeper was at play, but another part of him couldn't. He had been through too much with Naira to just dismiss the bond she was talking about. They had fought together, survived together. They had relied on each other in ways that went beyond the mission. "I'm not ready for this," Jack said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not ready for what you're saying." Naira nodded, as if she understood exactly what he meant. "I didn't expect you to be. But it's not something that can be ignored, Jack. It's part of the jungle. It's part of us." Before Jack could respond, Naira motioned for him to follow her, her gaze scanning the jungle. The tension between them didn't dissipate, but for the first time, Jack wasn't sure what to feel. Whatever this bond was, it was becoming undeniable. And though he wasn't ready to fully accept it, he knew one thing for sure: they had only just begun to uncover the complexities of their connection. They moved forward, the weight of the jungle's mysteries pressing on their shoulders, and Jack followed Naira into the unknown, unsure of what the next steps would bring. All he knew was that the jungle's grip on them both was tightening. And this time, there was no escape. The jungle continued to press in around them, the thick foliage blocking out most of the sky, the distant sounds of predators echoing in the distance. Jack could feel the pulse of the environment, its heartbeat, steady and relentless, and his body had become attuned to the rhythm, to the danger that seemed to permeate every leaf and tree. Naira moved through the jungle like she belonged to it, her instincts guiding her with an ease Jack could never hope to match. But he was learning. Slowly, he was beginning to pick up on the cues that she followed, the small signs that only someone like her would notice. She had taught him to listen to the sounds, the way the birds stopped calling when a predator was near, how the wind shifted when something big moved through the trees. Still, despite the lessons and the camaraderie they had shared in their escape from the rogue faction's base, Jack couldn't shake the unease that had settled in his chest. There was something about the jungle, something about the way Naira had looked at him after their conversation that still lingered in his mind. The idea of the bond she had mentioned, the one she claimed the jungle had chosen for them, was still difficult to grasp. He had told himself that he was here for the mission, that everything else would have to wait. But as they moved deeper into the jungle, that lingering tension between them seemed to grow. It wasn't just a mission anymore. It was something more, something unspoken, that they both felt but neither fully understood. Naira slowed down ahead of him, pausing to crouch beside a thick vine. Jack, staying a few steps behind, watched her with a sense of awe and wariness. She was so in tune with this world, so connected to the land. She wasn't just a soldier or a warrior, she was part of this jungle. It made sense, in a way, why she had been chosen by it, why the jungle had recognized something in her. But Jack was still an outsider. The rain had stopped, and the humid air hung heavy, thick with the scent of wet earth. Jack wiped the sweat from his brow as he approached her. She was examining something, some kind of footprint in the mud. Her eyes narrowed, and she motioned for him to come closer. "Another predator," she said, her voice a whisper. "It's been following us for a while. I thought it was just the sounds of the jungle, but it's close." Jack frowned, his grip tightening on his weapon. He had always been trained to deal with the dangers of hostile environments, but there was something about the jungle that felt different. The creatures here were unlike anything he had ever encountered, and Naira's knowledge was the only thing keeping them safe. "We need to move," she added, standing up and signaling for Jack to follow her. "This one is big. And it's smart." They started moving again, moving quickly and silently. Jack didn't ask any more questions, he just followed her, trusting her instincts. They moved deeper into the heart of the jungle, the dense trees closing in around them. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig, sent a wave of adrenaline through him. The silence between them stretched longer now. Jack could feel it, the pull. He wasn't imagining it. He had felt it before, after their encounter at the rogue base, but this time, it was stronger. The air between them seemed charged, and as they navigated the jungle, Jack found himself more and more aware of Naira's presence. They came to a clearing, a small patch of open ground surrounded by thick trees. Naira stopped, her body stiffening as she knelt down to inspect the ground. Jack crouched beside her, his senses alert as he looked around, trying to sense any movement. Naira's eyes met his, and for a moment, he saw something there, something different. It wasn't just the calm, unshakable warrior he had come to know. It was something else, something deeper. "Jack," she said quietly, her voice so soft that it almost seemed out of place in the jungle. "You feel it, don't you?" He swallowed, unsure of what she meant. His heart was pounding, but not from the danger of the jungle. It was something else, something he couldn't name. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse. She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stood up, turning her back on him for a moment as she scanned the surroundings. Her shoulders were tense, her body poised for action, but there was something in the air now. Something between them. She turned back to face him, her blue eyes locking onto his. "The jungle doesn't make mistakes, Jack," she said. "It chose you. It's in the way you move, in the way you respond. You didn't just survive, it's deeper than that." Jack blinked, trying to process her words. "I'm not sure I understand." Naira took a step closer to him, her gaze never leaving his. "I don't think you do yet," she said softly, her voice carrying a weight that felt both vulnerable and powerful. "But you will. It's not just about survival, Jack. The jungle is about connection. And the bond, it's not something you can fight." Jack stood frozen for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He didn't know how to respond. Part of him wanted to deny it, to push it away. But there was no denying the way he felt when he was near her, when their eyes met. There was something more between them, something undeniable. Before he could say anything, a sudden roar cut through the air, sending a jolt of panic through Jack's body. Naira's expression shifted instantly, her warrior instincts kicking in. She motioned for Jack to stay close as she dropped to a crouch, her hand on her weapon. The predator was closer now, too close. Jack felt the adrenaline surge through him as he crouched down beside her. The sound of heavy footsteps, too heavy to be human, pounded through the jungle. The beast was approaching fast. Naira's voice was barely a whisper, but it carried the authority of someone who had faced these creatures 100 times. "Stay low. Don't move until I say so." Jack nodded, his pulse racing as he melted into the underbrush beside her. The jungle had become eerily quiet, the air thick with the scent of the approaching predator. Jack could hear its heavy breathing, the snap of branches as it moved through the jungle. Naira's eyes never left the path ahead, and Jack followed her lead, every muscle in his body primed for action. The creature appeared, moving swiftly through the trees, its massive form only visible in glimpses. Jack's heart raced as he tried to steady his breath. It was only a few meters away now. The predator's glowing eyes locked onto Naira first, then shifted to Jack. In that moment, everything went still. Time seemed to freeze, and Jack's thoughts narrowed to one thing: survival. Naira sprang into action before he could even react, charging toward the creature with a speed that seemed impossible. She moved like lightning, striking at the beast with precision. Jack followed, instinctively pulling his weapon and firing. The jungle seemed to explode into chaos as the creature let out an enraged roar. Jack's heart was still pounding as the battle unfolded. Naira was faster, stronger, but Jack wasn't without skill. Together, they made quick work of the creature, bringing it down with a final strike. Breathing heavily, Jack stood beside Naira, his body trembling with adrenaline. They had survived. They always did. "You did well," Naira said quietly, her voice softer now, her fierce intensity giving way to something else. She glanced at him, her blue eyes flickering with a hint of something unreadable. Jack nodded, his thoughts still reeling from the fight. "I couldn't have done it without you." Naira gave him a rare, almost imperceptible smile. "We're in this together, Jack." As the jungle settled into quiet once again, Jack realized that whatever bond Naira had spoken of was no longer just an idea. It was real. And whether he was ready or not, it was something that had already begun to shape their future. The jungle had finally quieted, the sounds of distant predators muffled by the heavy rain that continued to pour down in torrents. Jack and Naira stood side by side, their bodies still vibrating with the aftermath of the fight. The predator lay motionless before them, its massive form now subdued. Jack could feel the weight of his breathing, the steady thrum of his heartbeat, as the adrenaline slowly faded. The fight had been intense, but they had come out of it together, alive, as they always did. Jack's mind was still reeling from the chaos, but his attention returned to Naira as she stood beside him, her body tense but composed. She hadn't said much since the creature had been dispatched, but Jack could feel the shift in the air. There was something different about her now, something more personal. Her usual stoic demeanor was still in place, but there was a subtle shift in the way she carried herself around him. The weight of the earlier conversation, the talk of the bond and the jungle's choice, still lingered between them. "Are you all right?" Jack asked, his voice quieter now, but still filled with concern. He hadn't seen her quite like this before. She had always been composed, capable, but now she seemed different. Naira's blue eyes flicked toward him, her gaze sharp but not cold. "I'm fine," she replied. Her voice was steady, though there was an underlying tension there that Jack couldn't ignore. "This is just how it is. You learn to live with it." Jack wasn't sure what she meant by it. Was she referring to the fight? Or the jungle itself? Or perhaps something else entirely? He had learned, over the course of their mission, that Naira didn't always reveal everything. She was a woman of few words, but those words carried weight. And now, the silence between them felt more like an unspoken understanding, one that neither of them could escape. "Do you always fight like that?" Jack asked, trying to break the growing tension. "I mean, you were incredible." Naira's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no humor in it. You learn to fight when the jungle demands it. It's not a choice. It's survival. Jack nodded, but his mind kept coming back to the bond she had mentioned earlier. The scent. The connection. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more going on between them, something he didn't fully understand, but that felt undeniable. I still don't get it, Jack admitted, taking a step closer to her. This bond. The mate thing. I don't know how to process it. I don't know how it fits into everything we're doing here. Naira met his gaze, her eyes unwavering. It's not about fitting into something. It's about something that's already there. Between us. Between the jungle and us. Jack swallowed hard, his heart pounding in his chest. The way she spoke was so certain, so matter-of-fact. As if it was something he should have already understood. But he couldn't. Not yet. But I'm not like you, he said quietly. I'm not from this world. I don't know what it means to. Stop, Naira interrupted, her voice soft but firm. She reached out, placing a hand on his shoulder, her touch surprisingly gentle for someone so fierce. You're here, aren't you? The jungle has made its choice. It doesn't matter where you're from. It matters where you are now. And where we go from here. Together. Jack looked at her, his mind racing. She was right. He was here, in the middle of this alien jungle, facing something that felt like fate. But could he accept it? Could he accept what she was saying? That there was something between them, something that neither of them had chosen, but that had already begun to take root? Before he could respond, a low growl echoed from the trees, cutting through the air like a warning. Naira's eyes flashed with awareness, and Jack instantly knew that whatever they had just spoken about, whatever this bond was, had to be put on hold. Stay close, Naira whispered, her tone low and commanding. Another predator. We need to move. Now. Jack's pulse quickened, his instincts taking over as he followed her once again, weaving through the jungle, staying low and fast. The sound of the growl echoed again, closer now, and Jack could feel the weight of Naira's presence beside him, every step synchronized as they moved like shadows in the night. The predator was close, its growl now mingling with the sound of its heavy footsteps. Jack didn't need to ask what kind of creature it was. Naira had already assessed it. They had learned to read the jungle in different ways, and as the growl grew louder, it was clear that they were being hunted. Naira stopped suddenly, her movements precise as she scanned the darkening jungle around them. Jack could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her muscles coiled, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. Stay low. Stay quiet, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Let me handle this. Jack nodded, crouching down beside her, his weapon at the ready. He knew better than to argue. He had seen what Naira was capable of, and he knew that his role right now was to stay out of her way and trust her. A rustling in the trees above them made Jack freeze. His breath caught in his throat, and he barely moved as Naira's hand shot out, pulling him back into the shadows. Her eyes locked onto something in the distance, and Jack could see the glint of moonlight off the predator's eyes as it stepped into the clearing. It was large, too large, and covered in thick, reptilian scales. Its claws scraped the ground, and its mouth was lined with sharp teeth, ready to tear through anything in its path. Without warning, Naira moved, a blur of motion as she launched herself toward the creature, her body a force of nature. Jack didn't have time to think, only to follow her lead. The jungle erupted into chaos as the predator lunged at Naira, but she was faster, her speed unmatched. She dodged the creature's strike, using her strength and agility to leap onto its back, her claws sinking into its flesh. Jack raised his weapon and fired, hitting the creature in the side. The shot didn't kill it, but it gave Naira the opening she needed. With a quick, precise motion, she drove her blade deep into the predator's heart, her eyes never leaving the creature as it collapsed. Breathing heavily, Naira stood over the fallen predator, her chest heaving with exertion. She wiped the blood from her hands, her gaze finally meeting Jack's. "Are you all right?" she asked, her voice steady despite the intensity of the fight. Jack nodded, his pulse still racing. Yeah. I'm fine. Naira's eyes softened slightly, a rare flicker of something other than battle-hardened focus in them. Good. We can't afford to be distracted. Not yet. Jack nodded again, understanding. But as they stood there in the aftermath of the fight, Jack couldn't ignore the fact that, despite the danger of the jungle, despite the threats that surrounded them, there was something else, something undeniable, between them. And no matter how hard he tried to push it aside, he knew he couldn't. The jungle wasn't just a place for survival, it was a place for connection. And he was beginning to understand that the connection Naira spoke of, the one the jungle had chosen for them, was real. It was there, in the way they fought together, in the way their instincts aligned. It wasn't just about the mission anymore. It was about them. And whatever the jungle had in store for them, Jack knew he wasn't facing it alone. The aftermath of the battle with the predator left Jack and Naira standing in a tense silence. The jungle around them had settled, the creature's final roar fading into the distant treetops. The only sound now was the steady rain, which had picked up again, its rhythmic patter creating an almost hypnotic backdrop to the moment. Jack stood a few paces away from Naira, his weapon still in hand, his chest heaving from the exertion. He wasn't sure if it was from the fight or from the knot of tension that had settled in his gut since their first encounter, but the uneasy feeling refused to dissipate. Naira wiped the blood from her hands and took a deep breath. She had done this countless times before, but for some reason, today it felt different. Jack's presence had changed the dynamic of the mission, but it had also shifted something deeper. The connection she had spoken of, whatever it was, had only grown stronger with each passing moment. She had known it for a while, but now, after fighting alongside him, she realized that the bond was not something she could ignore. Jack, still processing the intensity of the moment, approached cautiously, his eyes scanning Naira's face for any hint of discomfort or hesitation. "You all right?" he asked, his voice low but steady. It wasn't the usual reconnaissance question. It wasn't about the mission. This time, it was about her. Naira looked at him for a moment, her blue eyes unreadable. She had seen him fight before, but something about today's battle, something about how they worked together, had left her with more than just admiration. He was starting to see it too, the way they complemented each other, how their instincts aligned even though they came from two completely different worlds. Still, Naira didn't want to make it more than it already was. She didn't want to acknowledge the thoughts swirling in her head, the way his presence had started to feel like something essential. "I'm fine," Naira said, her voice cool but with a slight edge of something softer. "We did what we had to do. Now we move forward." Jack didn't push it further. He could tell there was more to what she was saying, more behind her words. But he wasn't about to press her. Not here, not now. The mission still had to come first, no matter what personal connections or emotions were stirring beneath the surface. "We need to get back to the extraction point," Jack said, glancing at their surroundings. The jungle felt alive around them, but there was an ominous quiet that settled in after the fight. The predators would be watching now. It was only a matter of time before the rogue faction realized they were being hunted. Naira nodded and gestured for him to follow. Without another word, they slipped back into the dense foliage, moving swiftly but silently. Jack had learned quickly to adapt to Naira's pace, matching her movements step by step. Her efficiency was something he admired, and more than that, it was something he trusted. She didn't need to speak much to communicate her plans. Every motion was deliberate, every glance calculated. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Jack couldn't help but notice how the air had changed. The rain had stopped, leaving the ground slick with moisture, the jungle now alive with the sounds of distant creatures. The faint glow from Naira's tattoos illuminated the path ahead of them, and Jack found himself following her instinctively. There was a certain rhythm to the way she moved, a grace that made him feel less like an outsider. "You're thinking about it," Naira said, breaking the silence between them. Jack looked at her, surprised by the observation. "Thinking about what?" "The bond," she replied, not breaking her stride. "What I said earlier." Jack swallowed, feeling a lump form in his throat. I don't know what to make of it, he admitted, his voice low. Everything's so different here. I came for the mission, to help, but it's harder to ignore. Naira glanced at him briefly, her expression still guarded. You don't need to understand everything right now. The jungle chooses. The bond is real, but it's not something we force. It's something that happens, whether we want it or not. Jack's thoughts whirled. He wanted to ask more, what did this mean for them, for the mission? But something told him not to press her. Not now. The jungle was their enemy as much as it was their ally. They had to get out of here, back to their extraction point, before the rogue faction or any other predators closed in on them. They continued their trek in silence, the rain starting again as they moved deeper into the jungle. Despite the danger, despite everything that had happened, Jack couldn't help but feel a strange sense of comfort when he was near her. It wasn't just her strength or her capabilities. It was something else. The way she made him feel connected to the jungle, to the mission. The way she made him feel that he wasn't just an outsider anymore. As they neared the extraction point, Naira stopped abruptly, her stance alert. Jack froze beside her, instinctively checking his weapon. They weren't alone. The tension in the air was thick. Jack's heart began to race again as he looked around, trying to detect the source of the disturbance. Stay low, Naira whispered, crouching into the underbrush. Jack followed her, moving silently as they both surveyed the area. Through the dense trees and fog, Jack could just make out the shapes of figures moving near the clearing where their transport was scheduled to arrive. The rogue faction was closing in, and it wasn't just a few scouts. There were more of them. We'll have to fight our way out, Naira muttered, her gaze fixed on the approaching figures. No way around it. Jack nodded, his jaw clenched. This wasn't the mission they'd planned for, but it was the mission they had now. There was no retreat, no room for error. They had come too far. We take them out quietly, Jack said, his voice low. We can't risk alerting the rest of the group. Naira gave him a brief look, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. Exactly. Follow my lead. They moved with the precision of a well-rehearsed team, slipping through the shadows, using the thick jungle to mask their movements. The rogue faction members were unaware of their presence until Naira was already on them, her speed a blur as she incapacitated the first guard with a single strike. Jack followed, covering her back, his aim true as he took out another guard silently. The battle was swift and brutal, but controlled. They worked in tandem, each anticipating the other's next move, their connection as seamless as the jungle around them. Naira's movements were fluid, instinctual, while Jack's reactions were deliberate, calculated. Together, they neutralized the rogue faction members one by one, taking care to stay out of sight of any remaining guards. Finally, the area was clear, and Jack allowed himself a moment to catch his breath. His heart was still pounding, but the adrenaline was slowly ebbing. Naira, on the other hand, didn't pause. She was already scanning the area for their next move. We're clear for now, Naira said, her voice steady. Let's move. Jack nodded, his thoughts still reeling from the encounter. They had survived another fight, another close call, but something had shifted in him during the battle. The way they moved together, the way their instincts had aligned so perfectly, it wasn't just a partnership. It was something more. And though Jack didn't fully understand it, he couldn't deny it anymore. As they made their way toward the extraction point, Jack felt a growing sense of certainty. This wasn't just about surviving the jungle or completing the mission. It was about something deeper, something that neither of them could control. They were connected now, bound by more than just circumstance. And for the first time since he'd arrived on this alien planet, Jack felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. With Naira by his side, the future didn't seem so uncertain anymore. It was something they would face together. The trek to the extraction point was far from uneventful. Jack and Naira had fought hard to get this far, their steps moving in perfect synchronization, their focus unwavering. But as the jungle closed in around them once again, Jack couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. Their shared battles, the quiet moments of survival, and the unspoken bond that had started to form were beginning to feel less like coincidence and more like fate. The air between them was thick with it, and though neither of them spoke of it directly, it was becoming impossible to ignore. The rogue faction was still out there, but their chances of making it to the extraction point undetected were growing slimmer. The jungle, once a place of silent vigilance, had now become a battleground. Every rustling leaf, every snap of a twig felt like an alarm, and Jack's every sense was heightened. The adrenaline still surged in his veins from their earlier confrontation, but it was different now. The danger was no longer the only thing driving him. The thought of Naira, her sharp instincts, her unshakable resolve, was with him every step of the way. "Stay alert," Naira's voice broke through his thoughts, low and steady, but with the command he had come to recognize. Her gaze scanned the surroundings, her body poised, waiting for the slightest sign of movement. Jack nodded, his hand tightening on his weapon as they pushed forward, the trees parting to reveal a narrow path. The extraction point wasn't far now. Just a few more kilometers, and they'd be in the clear. But in the jungle, nothing was ever that simple. The humid air clung to his skin as they continued through the underbrush. He could feel Naira's presence ahead of him, leading the way, her movements swift but deliberate. It wasn't just a mission anymore. It was her focus, her confidence, the unspoken connection between them that seemed to grow with every step. Jack didn't know when it had started, but he was beginning to realize that whatever was happening between them wasn't just about survival. It was something deeper. When they finally reached a small clearing, Jack's breath hitched in his chest. The sounds of the jungle had dulled, and a sense of quiet filled the space. Naira didn't stop, though. She kept moving, her gaze fixed on something just beyond the tree line. Jack followed her without question, his senses alert as he scanned the area. Something wasn't right. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and Naira stopped abruptly, holding a hand up. Jack froze beside her, his eyes narrowing as he tried to discern what had triggered her instincts. "They're close," Naira whispered, her voice as soft as the breeze that swept through the trees. "Too close." Jack's pulse quickened as he glanced around, his grip tightening on his weapon. He knew the rogue faction was dangerous, but they had managed to stay one step ahead. Now, with the extraction point in sight, they couldn't afford to make a mistake. "How many?" Jack asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Naira didn't answer immediately. Instead, she crouched low, her body blending with the shadows. Jack did the same, following her lead, as they moved deeper into the foliage, trying to stay out of sight. The ground was damp beneath his boots, and the soft rustling of leaves was the only sound that broke the eerie stillness of the jungle. "Too many," Naira replied, her voice tense. "They figured out where we're going. They're trying to cut us off." Jack's heart sank. He had expected resistance, but this was more than he had anticipated. They were being hunted, and the clock was ticking. "Do we have a plan?" Jack asked, his voice steady but laced with urgency. Naira's eyes locked onto his, her expression intense but unreadable. "We do what we've always done. We fight." It wasn't the answer Jack had hoped for, but it was the answer he expected. Naira didn't back down from anything, and that was part of what made her such an incredible partner. They would fight their way out, together, just like they always did. "We need to take them out before they can get to the extraction point," Naira continued. "Stay close. I'll lead." Without another word, she moved forward, her body a blur of motion. Jack followed, trusting her completely, as they approached the small group of rogue faction soldiers who had ambushed their path. The dense foliage offered little cover, but Naira seemed to know exactly where they needed to be. Jack's thoughts were clear. There was no room for hesitation. He wasn't going to let Naira down now. He had come this far, and together, they could get through this last stretch. The first guard came into view, unaware of their presence. Naira was already in motion, her movements fluid and deadly as she closed the gap between them. Jack followed suit, slipping silently into position, waiting for the right moment to strike. In a flash, Naira's blade was out, and the guard crumpled to the ground, silenced before he could even react. Jack moved swiftly, taking out the second guard with a shot that rang out loud in the jungle. The other soldiers were close, but Naira was already ahead, her focus unwavering as she engaged them one by one. Jack provided cover as Naira took down another guard, moving with a speed and precision that left him in awe. It wasn't just the way she fought, it was the way she moved, the way she commanded every moment. Jack had been a soldier for years, but he had never seen anything like this. "Move," Naira called out, her voice sharp as she darted forward to engage the remaining enemy combatants. Jack followed, moving quickly but carefully, his mind focused on the task at hand. Every shot, every move, had to count. Together, they cleared the area, each action seamless, each strike calculated. The rogue faction was no match for them. When the last of the guards fell, Jack let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Naira wiped the blood from her blade and turned toward him, her expression unreadable as always. "Good," she said, her voice steady but laced with approval. "We're close. Just a little further." Jack nodded, his body still buzzing from the fight. He had known this mission would be dangerous, but the level of trust and teamwork between him and Naira had changed everything. There was no hesitation now. No uncertainty. They were in this together, and together, they would make it through. They moved quickly, Naira leading the way, Jack staying close behind. The extraction point was only a few hundred meters away now, but Jack could feel the weight of what was to come. They had fought their way through the worst of it, but there was still one final hurdle to overcome. When they reached the clearing where the extraction was scheduled to take place, Jack's eyes scanned the area, searching for any signs of movement. "We're here," Naira said, her voice low. "Stay alert." Jack didn't need to be told twice. His heart raced as he checked the horizon. Their ride should have been here by now, but there was no sign of the shuttle. "They've changed the plan," Jack said, his voice tight with realization. Naira's eyes flicked toward him, her expression sharp. "We move, now." Without another word, they bolted for the clearing's edge, the noise of the jungle fading into the background. But as Jack and Naira made their way toward the rendezvous point, a new realization hit him. No matter what the future held, no matter what dangers awaited them, he wasn't facing them alone anymore. He had a partner, someone he could trust, and together, they could handle whatever came next. The clearing ahead was eerily quiet. The jungle's usual chorus of distant roars and rustling leaves had fallen still. Jack could feel the pressure building in his chest. Every step toward the extraction point felt like it brought them closer to some inevitable conclusion, but there was no way to tell what that conclusion would be. Naira's presence was a constant reassurance, but even she seemed on edge now, her movements sharper, more deliberate. The ambush had been a necessary evil, neutralizing the rogue faction's soldiers had put them on a clear path, but it also meant they were running out of time. The High Command wouldn't wait forever for them to return with the intel they had fought so hard to secure. And the longer they stayed in the jungle, the more likely it was they'd encounter another group of soldiers or something far worse. Naira's eyes scanned the horizon, always alert, always calculating. She hadn't said much since the fight, her focus fixed on the task at hand. Jack admired her in this way. She was always prepared, never letting distractions cloud her judgment. But Jack wasn't entirely sure he had the same clarity. There was something pulling at him, something about this mission, about the bond Naira had spoken of. It was no longer just about survival, it was about trust, about working together, and something more he couldn't quite define. "Almost there," Naira said quietly, her voice like a thread in the wind. "Keep your guard up." Jack nodded but didn't speak. There was no time for words now. They had come too far to falter now. They had crossed dangerous ground, fought through ambushes, and faced down a predator. And still, despite it all, there was something deeper, something more personal, growing between them. But the mission always came first. Always. At least, that's what Jack told himself. They pushed through the dense foliage, the weight of the mission still heavy on their shoulders. Jack's thoughts were a tangle of urgency and curiosity, but he kept his focus where it mattered. Naira had already begun to take them on a more strategic route, avoiding the main paths, taking the back ways. It wasn't just about escaping, it was about getting the intel back, getting it into the right hands. And if they didn't make it out soon, that might become impossible. The light filtering through the dense canopy began to fade as the sun dipped lower in the sky. Night was fast approaching. The extraction point, a small clearing near a cliff where a shuttle could land, wasn't far now. It had been chosen for its isolation and strategic advantage. But that same isolation also made it vulnerable. If they were late, if the rogue faction had managed to get reinforcements or anticipate their movement, they could be trapped. Any sign of the shuttle? Jack asked, his voice quiet but laced with tension. Naira didn't look back at him. She kept moving, her pace unbroken, her eyes trained ahead. No, she replied, the edge in her voice unmistakable. We're not the only ones making moves right now. Jack's gut twisted. He knew she was right. The moment they were compromised at the rogue faction's base, the entire situation had escalated. They were on borrowed time now, and every minute that passed felt like a risk. He knew Naira was prepared for whatever came next, but Jack wasn't sure how much more he could take. He wasn't used to being in the thick of things for so long, and the psychological strain was starting to show. They arrived at the extraction point just as the last rays of sunlight vanished beyond the horizon. Jack's heart skipped a beat as his eyes scanned the clearing. It was empty. No shuttle. No backup. We're too late, Jack muttered under his breath, frustration bubbling up. He stepped forward, looking around, his heart pounding faster. This was it, the end of the line. They had done everything right, fought their way through every obstacle, and now it seemed like they were going to be left stranded. No, Naira said sharply. They're just late. We wait. Jack turned to her, his impatience obvious. Wait? We don't have time to wait, Naira. They know we're here. If the rogue faction's reinforcements catch up with us. I said wait, Naira cut him off, her voice firm but controlled. It's not over yet. Not until I say it is. Jack took a deep breath, trying to control his temper. He had seen Naira's determination before, but something about the calm in her voice now made him uneasy. She had led them this far, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they had reached a point of no return. The jungle felt too still, the air too thick with tension. And then, as if to answer his doubts, the familiar hum of a shuttle engine broke the silence. Jack's heart leapt in his chest. He looked to Naira, and she gave a single nod, one of acknowledgement, one of reassurance. She had been right. The extraction was coming through. The shuttle descended slowly from the sky, its lights cutting through the darkness. The soft hum of the engines grew louder, and as it landed on the edge of the clearing, Jack felt a surge of relief. They had made it. They had survived. The ramp lowered, and Jack could just make out the silhouettes of the extraction team. They were moving quickly, their footsteps crunching on the wet earth. One of them, his superior, a calm and efficient officer, approached Naira and Jack, a grim smile on his face. Good work, he said simply. We've got the intel. Let's get you both out of here. Jack didn't respond immediately. His mind was still racing, his heart still pounding in his chest. They had made it through the worst of it, but there was no time to relax. The mission wasn't over until they were off this planet and back in the safety of their command ship. Naira, always the warrior, didn't waste any time. She moved toward the shuttle, her pace steady, her posture unyielding. Jack followed, but as he stepped onto the ramp, he glanced back at the jungle one last time. It had been their battleground, their home for what felt like an eternity. But it wasn't home anymore. Jack, Naira called out, her voice steady but soft. Come on. He nodded, stepping into the shuttle with a final glance back. The doors closed, and the shuttle lifted off, ascending into the night sky, leaving the jungle behind. Jack exhaled deeply, his shoulders relaxing for the first time in days. They were safe. But as the shuttle moved deeper into space, Jack couldn't help but wonder what came next. The bond that had formed between him and Naira wasn't something he could ignore. He didn't fully understand it, but he knew it was real. And though the mission was over, the journey they had started together was far from finished. As Naira settled into her seat across from him, she met his gaze with a quiet intensity. Neither of them spoke immediately, but the unspoken understanding between them was palpable. There was something more to their connection than just survival. Something neither of them had planned, but both were beginning to accept. The shuttle hummed steadily as it made its way into the stars, the jumble's distant calls fading into the background. Jack sat back, his mind finally quiet. Whatever came next, he knew he wouldn't face it alone. Not anymore. And as he glanced over at Naira, the silence between them felt comfortable. The mission was over, but the bond between them was just beginning. The hum of the shuttle engines filled the cabin as Jack leaned back in his seat, watching the stars streak by outside the small porthole. The jumble, the life and death struggle they had just endured, was far behind them now. The brief but intense battle with the rogue faction, the hunt for survival, had all led to this moment. Jack had done his part, and so had Naira. Together, they had overcome everything that had come their way. But now, as the shuttle cruised through the dark expanse of space, Jack felt a strange sense of finality that was only partly due to the mission being over. They had completed their task. They had gathered the intel, they had fought for their lives, and they had escaped unscathed. The rest of the galaxy, safe behind the walls of bureaucracy, would never know the full story. The risks they had taken, the bond they had forged, none of it would be reflected in official reports. But Jack knew that none of that mattered. What mattered was the journey they had shared. What mattered was Naira. He stole a glance at her across the shuttle. She was sitting with her back against the wall, her eyes closed, her posture relaxed. The usual hard edge she carried had softened, but Jack could still see the remnants of the warrior beneath her calm exterior. There was a quiet strength in her, something he had come to rely on more than he could admit. They hadn't spoken much since the extraction. There was an unspoken understanding between them, something that didn't need words. They had been through too much, seen too much, for small talk. But Jack knew the silence between them was not a cold one. It was a comfortable kind of quiet. It was the kind of quiet that told him they didn't need to say everything out loud because they already understood each other on some deeper level. He shifted in his seat, still unsure of how to address the connection that had grown between them. It had started as a partnership, a mission. But somewhere in the chaos of the jungle, in the heat of battle, something had changed. It wasn't just survival anymore. There was something else, something undeniable, that tied them together. "Naira," Jack said softly, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was a hint of uncertainty in it. She opened her eyes and looked at him, her gaze piercing, but there was something warm behind it too. She tilted her head slightly, silently asking him to continue. "I don't know how to explain it," Jack said, running a hand through his hair, "but I feel like everything, has changed. I'm not just talking about the mission. I mean, I think you and I both know that there's something more than just survival between us." Naira didn't look surprised by his words. In fact, there was a subtle understanding in her eyes. She had always been perceptive, always one step ahead. She didn't need him to say it, but she let him speak anyway, her silence inviting him to continue. Back in the jungle, during that fight, Jack trailed off, unsure how to put his thoughts into words. "I realized something. Something I didn't want to admit at first. I wasn't just fighting for the mission anymore. I was fighting for you, too. I've been fighting beside you this whole time, but now I see it. I see you. And it's not just about survival. It's something more." Naira's lips curled into a faint smile, but there was no teasing or mockery in it. It was genuine understanding. She leaned back, her arms crossing in front of her, but her expression softened. She had always been a woman of few words, but in this moment, her silence said more than anything she could have said aloud. "Jack," she said finally, her voice steady, yet laced with something deeper, something more personal. "You're not the only one who's felt it. The jungle didn't just choose you for the mission. It chose you for me." Her words hit Jack like a wave crashing against the shore, and he blinked, surprised by the honesty in her voice. Her gaze never wavered from his. For the first time since they had met, Jack saw something more in Naira, something more than just the warrior, more than just the partner. He saw a woman who had lived through countless battles, who had carried the weight of her people on her shoulders, and yet, here she was, standing beside him, allowing herself to be vulnerable in ways that surprised him. "You knew, didn't you?" Jack asked, his voice low, the question lingering between them. "You knew that we were something more. From the moment we met." Naira nodded slowly. "I've known since we crossed into the jungle. The bond between us, it wasn't just a coincidence. It was never just about the mission. It's been there, quietly growing." Jack felt his chest tighten, his mind racing. Everything, every fight, every struggle, every moment of doubt, had led to this realization. He hadn't been sure at first. The connection had been subtle, almost imperceptible. But now, after everything they had been through, it was undeniable. He had come to care for her in a way that was more than just professional, more than just based on their shared mission. It was deeper. It was real. "I don't know what to do with this," Jack admitted, his voice almost a whisper. "I didn't come here looking for this." Naira's smile widened, her eyes softening. "You don't have to do anything, Jack. It's not about doing. It's about being." Jack let her words sink in, the simplicity of them both grounding and overwhelming at the same time. In that moment, he realized she was right. He didn't need to figure everything out. He didn't need to overanalyze it. The bond between them wasn't something to dissect, it was something to embrace. "Together, then?" Jack asked, his voice a little rough but steady. Naira's gaze softened even further, her smile never fading. "Together." In that simple exchange, Jack knew everything had changed. There was no more doubt. No more questions. They had fought for each other, trusted each other, and survived together. And now, they would face whatever came next, together. The mission was over. The jungle was behind them. But the journey they had started was only beginning. The shuttle hummed steadily beneath them, the stars outside gleaming brightly as they traveled farther into the unknown. But for the first time, Jack wasn't afraid. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The mission was complete. The fight had been won. And with Naira by his side, Jack knew the future wasn't just about survival. It was about connection. About finding a way forward, together. As the stars stretched out before them, Jack leaned back in his seat, a sense of peace settling over him. There was still much to be done. But for now, in this moment, there was no one else he'd rather be with.